I just told her I'll text her once we're done with this one. Cool. Okay. Welcome to the Tonic Accord podcast. She also sent me kind of an updated bio. I forgot to share. Yeah. I think I accidentally pushed mute. Say something really quick. Okay.
All right, so let's turn
okay, there we go. Yeah, I pushed the wrong button and I just muted you. That'd be lovely. I was like, am I going crazy? Let's freaking do it. Yeah, let's do it, guys. Yeah, so from what I've gathered, I it's funny because you hear the word going around a lot lately, but I feel like there's a lot of things people don't know about it, so it's kind of a fun topic to be getting into. Yeah, so the fairness doctrine, I think in a general sense, and this is coming from the Washington Post, they just had like a encompassing article on what is it. And it basically required that TV and radio stations holding FCC issued broadcast licenses devote some of their programming to controversial issues of public importance, and also allowing the airing of opposing views, right? So say if you have, I don't know, like anti-abortion person being, I don't know, like a program that goes into anti-abortion rights or something, then maybe you would also want to offer the other side of it, like the pro-abortion side, right? And so, like, in a very general sense, that's what it was. And it started in 1949. And I think that's very key because we do need to remember that that was a very different time. And it was really only radio and some television at the time. There wasn't social media. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't, the My Pillow guy getting banned on Twitter, all this crazy stuff.
Hold on. I think I accidentally made a mistake with the recording. I didn't think I had my mic was, I think, muted. Like, you heard me, but they were muted in the recording. So let me just...
Oh, fun.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me just make sure we're good.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I definitely want to stop now instead of down the line and be like, wait, what?
Yeah, I don't want them to think I'm schizophrenic, just, kind of talking to myself over here. So, and this is coming from the...
Yeah, okay, I'm glad I caught it. I was completely muted on my end.
Good call.
Okay,
Good call.
Cool, okay.
So let's just do that whole thing over.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Let's, yeah, sorry about that, bro.
No, dude, no worries. It's 4 minutes in, not like 25 or something. So.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. I need recording in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast, everyone. My name is Drew. I'm joined by my co-host and friend, as always, Alex. Today we're going to be covering the Fairness Doctrine, a piece of legislation that is a regulation from the FCC that required broadcast news to present issues of public interest in a fair and balanced manner and give people of opposing opinions equal time. The idea was to create an arena where there was a fair representation in media. However, there's a lot of controversy and criticism of the fairness doctrine, and then it was eventually not enforced after the 1980s and officially removed from the FCC in 2011. So we're going to be talking about the fairness doctrine today and why it's being brought up again in regards to talking about media and politics. So Alex, just to start off, give me your understanding of the fairness doctrine.
Yeah, definitely. So it's definitely a topic that I feel like we've heard a lot recently, kind of in this era of misinformation. You have some Republicans wanting to, repeal 230 of the Decency Act from the 90s. And these things are all kind of related, but not really. And I think that's why it's good that we're putting some time into this episode today. And yeah, like you said, 1949, the FCC kind of got this going, and it required that TV and radio stations devote some of their programming to controversial issues of public importance. And I want to get into public importance later, that exact terminology. But for now, it also is about opposing views, right? So if you had someone who's super anti-gay marriage and you have a program about it, whatever, you'd probably want to give the equal time to someone else who has a differing view. And I do want to note that when this came out, it was about 70 years ago. So there is a huge difference in just radio and television, which the FCC was looking at this fairness doctrine for. And these days where we have podcasts, we have social media, we have My Pillow guy getting banned on Twitter. Like, it's a different world.
Yeah.
So that's just what I would start out with. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely a different world. So we do have to look at what was the purpose of it at the time and kind of the philosophy behind it. And does this apply today, or perhaps something? Sorry, I guess I have an update ready. There's something today maybe have to morph into a new version of the fairness doctrine. But let's break it down. And someone who broke it down really well, I think, was this guy, Dr. Stephen Hicks. He has his doctorate in philosophy, and he also studies entrepreneurship. He's an interesting figure that I found online, and he broke down this lecture about the fairness doctrine. He has an argument for and an argument against, and really he talks about who are the actors, right? And so he talks about how you have the broadcasters and the audience, and the argument for the fairness doctrine is that he understood that the broadcasters, have economic incentives and in some cases might monopolize the airwaves, and the fear is that the audience is passive and easily manipulated, and kind of won't have too much of a choice. The argument for the fairness doctrine then says that, like, in a free market system with just broadcast and airwaves being loose, you have a win-lose scenario where the broadcasters are like, it's a predation. They're preying on the audience, and also, if you have a monopolization of like the airwaves with as far as businesses, then if a business prefers one political opinion over another, they can just decide that they'll air this opinion and won't air the other, or they'll sell airtime to this politician and they'll just decide not to sell time to the one that they don't like. And so the competitors have strengths and weaknesses that the FCC considered unfair, right? That was kind of the argument for. Do you think that like do you see that do you see that as the reality as it plays out, like that kind of structure?
Yes and no. Like I think I told you this yesterday or something. Like I'm really torn on the fairness doctrine. But the one thing I would say is that I feel like the debate over the fairness doctrine, I feel like the root of the issue is what you see the role of the federal government should be. Right. Like, should you leave the media up to the open market, the free market, or should you leave it up to the responsibility of government regulation? And so honestly, I could see an argument either for or against using that, just depending kind of on how you see the federal government. And I lean more, especially in stuff with information, free speech and stuff like that, I kind of lean more into a laissez-faire approach when it comes to government. Though at the time I could understand the rationale, but my issue is that fairness and public opinion and public interest are always in the eye of the beholder of power at the time.
Sure.
And so that was always my issue, is because I don't think it's the best way to combat, one-sided bias, especially because, for example, you had the Kennedy administration basically use this to silence some forms of media that were on the right that were very highly critical of the Bay of Pigs and other somewhat foreign policy disasters during the Kennedy administration. And Nixon was very against this. He spoke out about how the Fairness Doctrine actually was like limiting conservative speech or like conservative ideas. And now I'm not going to go into if that's totally true or not right now. But then when Nixon came into power, about 8 years or whatever, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, he then used it against Democrats for a lot of the same ways. It was limiting opposing views that were highly critical, especially during Watergate. So the crux of it to me is that fairness is in the eyes of the beholder, and so there's really no way to just have I feel like an umbrella way of dealing with fairness.
In what ways did Nixon prevent or JFK how did they limit the other side's arguments using the fairness?
It was basically in the terms of, say you have like a local conservative talk radio, but it's owned by like a larger company or a larger corporation or something under that scope. Basically, especially under the Kennedy years, like early 60s, basically what they would do is like there just wasn't proper funding or spotlight given to some of these more conservative ones, and let's say like the other side or the like Democrat side was more bolstered during that time, and the same would be true. What happened during the Nixon one is that basically they kind of used it. I don't want to say to silence, but they used it in a way to kind of. I'm trying to think of best how to put this. Like it was basically used in order to decide what was fair and what was not for public interest. And so if there were controversial ideas coming out, sometimes false information, sometimes not false information, it was deemed out of the public interest. And that was both sides. It was a right or left, depending who was in power. And that just kind of goes to the crux of what my fear is about it, is that it's all arbitrary, and I don't know if the government should be deciding what is fair or what is in the public interest. And so just both of those administrations basically used this to deem what was acceptable in terms of media and like radio coverage. And so a lot of people would say that, when Reagan's administration repealed it in the 80s and conservative radio kind of took off after that, it was somewhat of a backlash to this somewhat suppressing in the 60s and 70s.
I hear that. I mean, and certainly that's a fear of mine as well. What the government deems fair one day, a different government, which is different people, right? Because the government is people that make it up, not some like shadowy entity. It's literally just the people that work for it, and those people will change, and so the idea of fairness will change over time. So that's certainly an issue. I also think that the big thing is at the time when the Fairness Doctrine was established in 1949, people got their news from the radio. And there was only so many radio waves. There's literally a scientific limitation to radio waves. You can only have so much bandwidth in space, right? If you didn't get on the FM dial or the AM dial, you're out. So I could see how at the time they figured, since there's so limited an amount of of sources of information, we need to make sure that there is some kind of mechanism in place to allow the incentive to have both sides represented. Because if there's only ABC and NBC and that's it, then you're going to have to make sure that people get represented. Now, what's interesting is I think the conversation around today of the rehashing of the Fairness Doctrine is actually completely different circumstances, because it's not that we have too little sources of information. It's that there's too many sources of information, that the water is so muddy now that people think that they can just, their timeline on Facebook is now their information, not a broadcasting company. So it's an interesting, when people talk about bring back the Fairness Doctrine, I think that we need to explore something of the idea of it and like it, and we'll go into how private companies are doing that already on their own in a second. But I definitely don't think we should bring back the actual FCC regulation, the Fairness Doctrine, because it's just outdated. It's about broadcast and radio. I mean, another thing that I wanted to mention was, and I used to believe this too, which was a lot of people on the left would say things like, oh, without the Fairness Doctrine, that started Fox News. We get Fox News because of Reagan ending the Fairness Doctrine. And in reality, that's not true, because again, the Fairness Doctrine is only about broadcast, whereas Fox News is cable, which is a private paid service where you have a private company puts cable lines underground, whereas the airwaves are just like public airwaves. And so the Fairness Doctrine would not have stopped Roger Ailes and his Fox News right-wing, in my opinion, propaganda, and other opinion, conservative viewpoint channel. That would have still happened no matter what. I think it's things like maybe Rush Limbaugh that would have had to operate differently under the fairness doctrine.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I also think that kind of in the 70s and early 80s, there was kind of this marinating conservative kind of grassroots voice. So I would agree with you. I think there's probably a lot of factors why things like Fox News kind of took off after the 80s. You know, you kind of had like the 24-hour news cycle come out of there with CNN.
Right. CNN.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think there was a lot of reasons. And it's interesting because I think you're right, is now it's completely flipped. I don't actually think the fairness doctrine should even be in the conversation because it's such an outdated act, right? I mean, it truly just doesn't encompass what we're dealing with now. And it's actually kind of interesting because there was the court case, let me see, I have it written down here, Red Lion Broadcasting versus the FCC, which was in 1969. And basically this was a challenge to the fairness doctrine. This company, Red Lion Broadcasting, was challenging the FCC's ruling on this. And basically what the Supreme Court said was that they upheld the decision, but they warned about how if the doctrine ever began to restrain speech, then it would be unconstitutional.
Right.
And then 5 years later, without ruling the doctrine unconstitutional, the court concluded in another doctrine that it does dampen the vigor and limits the variety of public debate. So that was the fear of courts, you know, in the 60s and 70s. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, that's not the problem anymore.
Right.
I could type in Donald Trump right now on the internet, and I could get a myriad of sources with very different information. And so it's technically fair if you think about it in terms of how this actual doctrine came out. Obviously, broadcasting is different from social media and the internet, but I could get very different points of view from going on the internet. So I don't think that's the problem anymore. You know what I mean?
See, and that's where I think we have to dig in deeper because in the video from Dr. Stephen Hicks about the argument against the fairness doctrine, he lays it out. I'll go over to it real quick just to see if I can get to his like whiteboard. Yeah, so
I love the whiteboard.
Yeah, and so here he talks about, look, like in this instance, the against the fairness doctrine, it's under the assumption that broadcasters, one, have the right to property, right to liberty, and profit motivation. That's all rights protected by the government. And then in this model, he also says the audience. See, this is the problem. Is the audience he says is self-responsible and active. You know, if they think they right. And maybe that was the case back then. And maybe that was the case in the 80s where, hey, you know, like, if you don't like it, turn the dial, which I think the Heritage Foundation says here in their criticism as well. It says right here, there's a simple solution for any family seeking an alternative viewpoint or any lawmaker irritated by a pugnacious talk show host. Turn the dial. And that is true, but we are in a different era now where I don't think that, like, my problem is with the algorithms on Facebook and the algorithms on Google and Instagram, like, the way that these algorithms work to kind of feed into your worldview, you're not turning the dial. Facebook is edging the dial for you. So this idea of like, because like think about it like this, like if you're on cable, if you just buy a TV and you get a basic cable package, yeah, you like everyone else has the same amount of cable shows. You can just turn the dial. But imagine if you were watching cable and you watched, you know, sports and CNN and some other stuff. And then the cable provider decided to get rid of some of the channels they thought you weren't going to watch and then put in channels you were going to watch. So that's them turning the dial a little bit for you. Yeah, you may still turn the dial yourself from those channels, but your selection is manipulated by an algorithm designed to reinforce your worldview. I mean, that's literally how Facebook operates. So what I think a good point is, like, I definitely don't, again, like I said, I don't want to adopt the old fairness doctrine, but there's a lesson to be learned here, that the game is changing. And this idea that you can just turn the dial and somehow be on par with anyone else's feed is not true.
Absolutely. And I think you're so correct there. That's why I think that, honestly, the fairness doctrine is somewhat of a moot point when it comes to like what is next. Because you're right, it's not the fact that people don't have access to information. It's the people that pass the information to us, or the algorithms that pass the information to us, might have different intentions. They don't care about giving us facts. They care about appealing to our emotions. And study and study again shows us that anger and hate, they do much better than information and unity. Yeah. So I do agree with you. And like that kind of brings me to a question for you isn't it interesting that we're kind of seeing this push for getting rid of like what Article 230 of the Decency Act from the 1990s, but it's from Republicans. Like that's why I find it interesting because, like, the Heritage Foundation in the 90s, wrote this paper about
Right.
like super against the fairness doctrine, saying it's not fair, blah blah blah. But now you had in 2019 Senator Hawley, he was basically fighting to put almost like super strict government on these social media companies. And it's interesting to me, like, do you think that there is some reason to what they're trying to do, or do you think it's just for political reasons of allowing people like Trump to still have a voice?
Well, I think Josh Hawley's a political hack. I mean, I think he's a hack. So I don't really, I don't think. I mean, he's already backed off of his vote against the election because he's gotten him in trouble. So I think he just was testing to watch how far he could go. And I think that big tech is a new enemy, right? I mean, obviously, I do think that, like, we need to be careful and regulate tech companies. We've talked about it before, so I'm not exactly like anti big tech. But I do think that, like, there's like Facebook is being used as a scapegoat for problems that are much larger than just Facebook, but Facebook's a part of it. I also think in the model against the fairness doctrine, part of it is that the idea that these broadcasters, or in the modern version, social media sites, have a right to their property. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about is, like, if we're going to this free market thing and want to apply that to the free market of ideas, then someone who is against the fairness doctrine should also be totally fine with Twitter banning Trump. That's a broadcaster or platform holder now, exercising their right to their own property. This is our IP. So, like, it's this weird double flip where it's like someone who I think ideologically, if you're against the fairness doctrine, you abide by, I guess, the model that Stephen Hicks lays out. Then the banning of Trump on Twitter is a part of it.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, definitely. I think that's interesting because, especially in my old party, I guess the Republican Party, there's a huge split between them. Like, right down the middle, like, you kind of have still the more libertarian-minded ones who are like, let Twitter do what they want to do, let Facebook do what they want to do. But there is this kind of more, I mean, basically, the way I see it is that Reagan in the 80s kind of set the precedent for where conservative values were going in terms of free speech and media, right? Like, he was kind of the North Star for, laissez-faire approaches to dealing with information. And I think we're seeing a break. Could Trump be, the next North Star for the Republican Party in some ways, where they don't really care as much about actually allowing free speech, but it's more like kind of enforcing the government to be fair, which ironically kind of goes back to the fairness doctrine? Because, I mean, I think it's tough because you're right. Like, Twitter is a private company and they have the right to do this. You know what I mean? But I would argue that a better way to do this would still be to let Trump talk, but almost keep doing what they're starting to do is fact check. Like, I just feel like it's better to let that out there and maybe have an asterisk next to what he says than just silencing it. And that's why last week, I kind of mentioned about it, like a constitutional convention for the digital age. Like, I think we almost need to create something like a fairness doctrine for the digital age. And I think that would mean that Congress needs to come together and decide, like, is it feasible for someone to be banned on Twitter when literally it is like the megaphone for public opinion and public speech?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, it almost seems like Republicans want a new fairness doctrine for social media. And I think that something like that should be around. But I do think that, like, let's also, we've been up here in the philosophical ideology. Let's bring it back down to earth. This idea that this audience is self-responsible is not true. We saw a massive amount of people be manipulated into believing our election was stolen on a scale unseen before. The fact that the majority of Republicans still don't believe Joe Biden is legitimately the president is disgusting, right? That's like extremely, extremely crazy. If you look back at 84% of Hillary Clinton voters accepted that Trump was president after he won in 2016. Right? That is not what we're seeing on the other side of the aisle right now. So there's something seriously wrong, and people have been obviously manipulated because the fact of the matter is Joe Biden won the election. So I think we put too much faith in the audience being self-responsible and active and enough to turn the dial on things that are too fringe. Like, we obviously see that that's not the case. And so we have to do something. So if it means, conservative voices should be on Twitter, but with like fact checking, sure. But I do think at the end of the day, some things that are like calling up for like fire in a theater should just not be allowed on any platform. And I think like what we saw from Donald Trump was if not there already, pretty close to yelling fire in a theater.
Yeah, definitely. And no, I mean, kind of going off of that, the Brookings Institute, I think it was back in 2019, had a great article. It's like just how to combat fake news. And they basically argue that people are going to social media and going to the internet more and more for news because they just don't trust the actual media apparatus of kind of, like CNN, Fox, whatever. Like there's just a declining trust. Like, and this is in 2019, so it's a little old, but they say 14% of Republicans believe the media report the news accurately, and 62% of Democrats do. Even though Democrats are much higher than Republicans, it shows that people don't trust the news, right? Yeah. It's kind of disturbing, especially for a democracy. And so I actually kind of have a theory, because I was thinking about this, is I think somewhere where the fairness doctrine actually still does somewhat apply is that Sinclair deal, back in, I think it was like 3 years ago, 2018. And Sinclair was just a media group that kind of bought up all these local news outlets, pretty much monopolized local news. And so we kind of have this interesting dichotomy of, it actually seems like local news is right biased, and it seems like national news is more left biased, because Sinclair actually is like a technically a local broadcast network that isn't giving fair news. Because like I live near Sacramento, so we get their channels, and it's funny because like if you watch like national coverage or turn on like the nightly news on NBC with Lester Holt, it's quite like centrist left. But if you watch local news, it's quite more favorable for Republicans. It's quite more favorable to Donald Trump. And it's just kind of interesting to see this dichotomy. So I kind of wonder, because like a lot of rural areas, I think the people watch more local news than national news. And so you do see this dichotomy. And I feel like a group like Sinclair, if the fairness doctrine was still being enforced, they wouldn't probably be allowed to be doing what they're doing, because I don't have specific examples just because I don't watch enough of like local news. But there's a lot of criticism that Sinclair's covered stories like from a lot of like Trump sycophants, like Mike Lindell, Mr. My Pillow, he's done interviews on some of these local talk news radio shows and stuff, and it's just kind of weird.
Yeah, there's this famous video right here where it's like I'll wait for the ad, but where you can see all the Sinclair stations have the same script.
San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
Balanced.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trending irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Damn.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets.
So anyway, you get the idea. They're not like their message they're saying is not wrong, but like kind of like that idea of like the government, who decides what's fair, right? Also, like Sinclair, like who decides what's like real? Like they're saying they're real news. I'm like, I don't think that's true, right? So, oh man,
yeah,
it's complicated.
Yeah, and the one thing I just want to add on that is that I think one of the best criticisms of the fairness doctrine, it was in that Heritage Foundation one, where it basically said that there was a fear of FCC retaliation. And so basically, even though the fairness doctrine required you to basically show opposing views, sometimes because you don't want retaliation from those views, you just don't even bring them up in the first place.
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of what we see sometimes, especially in local news, is that you just don't cover the other side, or like you don't even cover the actual importance of a topic because you don't really want a response. And I think we've seen that time and time again, with or without the fairness doctrine, which is just an issue with news. But I think you're right that we need a campaign of better like education on dealing with news, and it's something new. But I really do agree with you there.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like just editorial board. Like even if the stories you print are pretty unbiased, it's still the selection of what stories you decide to put on your paper or articles that still is like shows a bias. And just like that, like you said, like for fear of retribution or retaliation or having to abide by the fairness doctrine, people won't do some stuff. Or today, maybe not for the fairness doctrine, or not because of the fairness doctrine, but for fear of like audience like Twitter lashback. Some people won't run some stories. So definitely to wrap this up, I think we're both in agreement that the fairness doctrine, the FCC legislation of the fairness doctrine is outdated. Bringing that back will not solve the current woes we have with fake news. And anyone that says bring back the fairness doctrine to end Fox News, it does not know what they're talking about. But I still would go to say that I think we're both in agreement that we do need to do something about what we're seeing as far as misinformation and disinformation with the actual nefarious purposes online and how people get their news sources. So I don't know if we're going to solve this problem tonight, but I do think we can glean something from the fairness doctrine, but it's not going to solve this problem.
Absolutely. And yeah, to be honest, like I think we need things like Fox News and OAN to be checked, and we need people to maybe be able to, sift through that information a little bit better. But in the end of the day, I don't really want to live in a world where Fox News isn't allowed, to be completely honest, because I think that would just be a slippery slope. So I agree with you, but I don't think we're going to get to solving this tonight. I do think we're in agreement that the fairness doctrine doesn't need to be reinstated. So that's a start.
Yeah. Well, let us know your thoughts about the fairness doctrine. Do you believe it's outdated? Do you believe it should be, refurbished for the modern era? Or is this idea of government determining fairness in media just something we shouldn't touch altogether? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're watching live, stay tuned. We're going to have a guest come on and talk about, the authoritarian slip in Turkey. And if you're watching the recordings, look for that uploaded in a few days as well. Thank you, everyone, for taking a look at the Tonic Accord.
Sweet.
All right, sweet. One down. I'm glad we caught that audio problem. That would have sucked.
Yeah, thank God.
I noticed I looked at my mic because I can hear myself. I know you can hear me because we talked, but I looked at like my mic output levels on the actual dashboard, and it was just nothing. And I was like, that can't be right.
Thank God. I don't think people would want to hear me talking to a mysterious, non-existing person the whole time. I'm going to run to the bathroom really quick. I will tell her. She said she downloaded Discord, so she's already in here, so she would just need to join, right?
Okay, yeah, so we got to go. Let's do this down. We got to add her to this call.
Okay. I'll be right back.
I'll try and get her.
God. Sounds good. Oh.
Okay, I'll give us one sec. Twitch. Y'all can see my email for a little bit. That's kind of sketch, but it's all good.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Good morning. She said she'll be there in 1 minute.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I just uploaded this to the drive now. It's called the failed fairness doctrine should stay dead.
I like that. That sounds good.
Yeah.
I figure we could probably just put that one out first, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter, but
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine with me.
it doesn't. I mean, I don't give a shit, but I don't give a shit about anything. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, poor Packers. Oh.
Yeah, that night, man, I was. The suicide hotline was.
Contingency, what's up, man? Oh yeah, the Packers lost.
Oh, that's right. We got. Hello, contingency. There we go.
So,
How's it going?
If you're just joining, my friend, we just wrapped up our episode about the Fairness Doctrine, which will be uploaded onto our YouTube probably either tonight or tomorrow. But stick around because we're going to have a guest come on shortly. She's from Turkey, currently living and working in the United States, and she's going to give us some insight onto Turkey's authoritarian slip, which I'm super interested because I've only gotten the articles about it, and I'm down to get some primary source.
Yeah, definitely. And I also just, if we ever can leave the country again, I want to go to Turkey. So yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. My brother's been to Istanbul and he said it was dope, and he bought a hookah there. But then he I think he was there like right before the Arab Spring. Contingency, what is the Fairness Doctrine? Oh, that's about you just missed the whole episode on it, but I'll give you a little briefing. It's an FCC legislation, which is a communications commission in the United States that regulates like airwaves and broadcasting. They decided that from 1949 until the 80s, if you had an area of public interest, you had to like give airtime to both sides, and in best faith interest in providing a good argument for both sides of the topic. But sounds really good. It actually led to some issues, and it only applied to broadcast. And we were talking about how some people want a fairness doctrine to be reinstated with the news media today, and we were just basically talking about how that'd be quite difficult to do and complicated, and perhaps there's things we can learn from the fairness doctrine, but it's not going to solve the woes of fake news. It's an interesting piece of historical legislation because. There's big philosophical debates to be had about the role of government and media.
From the way I've heard people talk about the Fairness Doctrine, I think they assume that it means like, say if Sean Hannity says something crazy, then he gets then they would have to address that statement. It's not that, because I've heard some callers on some of the shows I listen to be like, should we reinstate the Fairness Doctrine to stop things like Fox News from saying crazy stuff? And it's like, I don't think it's going to do that for so many reasons. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, one is Fox isn't broadcast, right? So that's the main reason is it just doesn't even literally apply to cable at all.
That's true.
It's broadcast, so it's anything using public airwaves.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, is Nazla...
She ready to go? She almost done?
Oh, no.
I can see her. She's online in Discord. Oh, there we go. Let me add her to the call.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
DM.
Friends.
She's in here. How do we get her in?
Yeah, how did we do that? I don't even know how we did that last.
Oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. Hey, Nazli, you there?
I'm there. Give me 1 sec. I'm trying to connect my AirPod.
Okay, sure, no problem.
I'm technologically handicapped, as you might remember.
Where the hell is the sound coming from? Oh, it's over here.
Okay, we're all in the same call now, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn on my camera.
You guys have a separate one?
No, we're good. This works. We just got to get this audio figured out because I can hear myself playing back.
Oh, you have a microphone and a whole setup.
Where's the case?
Oh, in my bathroom. I'll go get it.
Okay.
It's not recording.
Yeah, I was like, I do not want to be in this.
There's no video yet. We can just hear.
Yeah, look like we can't see you.
Wait, you can't hear me, right?
We can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I can hear.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to help.
Yeah, we're trying to connect it to the laptop.
Okay, so now.
Good old Apple technology.
I really don't know how to use technology. I honestly feel like I'm going to get fired from my job every day because I'm like, how do you sign a document? And everyone's like, download Adobe.
Oh. Like, okay.
Are you in Windows or are you using a Mac?
I'm on a Mac.
Okay, good luck. I don't know. I'm on Windows.
I'm on a Mac, but I don't think I have any great feedback.
How did you?
I'm trying to
how do
keep
you-
myself
How do you
afloat.
attach a new set of headphones, like Bluetooth? Is there like a Bluetooth option?
Yeah. And then you just like I believe it's like pair or something, and you hold down that like white circle on the AirPods case, and then it like
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Is
the
it?
process
Is
I'm on
that it?
right now. No.
Oh.
That's your own thing.
Damn.
That
Is my video
what's the
on?
setting?
No.
you have to click. There's like a white circle on the left that says turn off or turn on camera. It shows like a video camera
I don't get the option. Oh, there it is.
Hold on, let me get.
Okay,
somewhere.
let's connect this thing first.
Wait, you have to click.
Yeah, but I want to connect to Bluetooth first. Okay, I'll just did it.
Oh, Discord.
Hi,
I'm familiar with
Hey, there
Discord.
we go.
I haven't seen her. Drew, I saw you at the Halloween party. I think that was last, right?
Yeah, that was pre-COVID. At
Alex, I haven't seen you in like 20 years.
Yeah, at least 20 years. I was thinking of like I don't know, half a century maybe.
we lived in a different world during the Halloween party.
Where
I'd love
is
to go to
she?
a party.
I miss parties.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have your AirPods all connected in? I can't hear myself. So
We're
that's
trying
weird.
to figure it out right now. I don't know why it's not connecting.
It's not even showing up.
You
can't-
sound good.
Yeah, you sound fine. You can't hear me in the AirPods. You're just hearing me through the laptop, or what?
Yeah, I'm hearing you through the laptop right now.
Oh, okay.
Is this sound good? I may not need it then.
As long as I can't hear my echo, which right now I can't, then that's fine.
Yeah, I can't.
So, I mean, if
Okay.
you prefer this way, we can do it like that. If you don't want to bother
I
with
mean,
the
they're not showing up on the Bluetooth thing, so I don't think we have a choice at this point.
Okay.
Maybe they're trying to connect to your phone.
No, my Bluetooth's off. Do you just want to put your headphones in your jack?
Yeah, let me try that.
There we go.
Whatever works.
They're not old.
I have a dongle for you.
You have an old one? Thank you.
Those damn dongles.
Say bye to me.
All
Or maybe I should put. Is this going to be on video as well?
if that's cool with you, I mean, you don't have to. If you're not
Is it going to be on Twitch?
We're on Twitch right now.
We're actually on Twitch right now.
Are we live right now?
We are. So we had already been recording. I'm sorry. We should have let you know. That's our bad.
Yeah.
we oh, you look fine. You look great. You're
I
perfect.
showered for you guys.
Oh wow.
There we go.
We're honored. I don't even shower for my podcast.
Is Twitch recorded or like it's just live and it's done?
It's live. I mean, well, we do upload these to YouTube, if that's cool with you.
If you cut this part, I'm down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We'll cut out the intro part. We'll have like an official, like actual recorded podcast segment. So don't worry.
This part wouldn't be good for either side if we just put it on YouTube randomly. I don't think. So.
Alex, are you back in the U.S. now? Are you still in Spain?
I'm back in the U.S. Yeah, the contract ended, and I'm just at home until the fall, and then I'm going to start grad school. So, yes,
Okay,
I'm
where-
back.
Oh
Where are you
yeah.
going?
I'm waiting on 2 more schools, but it's probably between USC, San Diego, and North Carolina.
No, don't go to North Carolina.
I kind of want to be honest.
The
Like,
amazing Wolf Skeptic. Thank you for the follow, bro. Contingency Re.
Ooh, nice.
Contingency Re over here is talking about Turkey faked a coup that happened 4 years ago. We'll see. We'll see what Nazli here has to say about it. We're definitely going to dive into that incident among many others.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, cool.
yes.
Awesome.
Fuck yeah.
All right. So whenever you're ready, let's make sure we're all good. Whenever you're ready and the sound's all good, we'll start. I think I can hear myself again though.
I think I can.
How is it now?
Let's try. Let me test it out. Hello, hello, hello.
I can't hear anything now.
Uh-oh.
Maya, I can't hear it.
We might be better off.
Why is it
without,
not
but hey.
It's connected. Do you have your volume up?
Yes. Jesus,
It's
like, I hope
connected.
people are not watching my.
And it's full battery. What do you mean you can't hear me?
I
Well,
can't hear
contingency.
anything.
Contingency could be judging. I don't know.
I cannot hear you.
Okay, let's take them out.
Let's just
I don't know
disconnect
why it's being difficult for you.
Jesus.
Fucking AirPods.
How do I disconnect it?
I couldn't
No,
get
you
them to work
don't
with my.
disconnect
I
anything,
couldn't
it's
get them to
just
work with my
automatically
Windows 10
disconnect.
either. At
Okay.
all. They were pretty
And
bad.
then we're gonna do settings.
Okay, you're back. Well,
Okay.
it's not going to work out with the earphones, so I think we can just dive in.
We just gotta make sure that I don't hear my audio
Let's-
echo. Yeah. that.
Okay.
I unfortunately I can still hear myself.
Through my laptop?
Yeah.
We could
Jeez.
have it. So Nazla, if you could like mute your volume when you're not talking, that could be a fix, I believe. Couldn't that work, Drew? Maybe.
I guess.
Did you say Drew, baby?
Maybe.
Did you say
Maybe with an M. Maybe.
baby?
Hey, baby. No. Let's.
Hey, baby.
Well, let's make
What
this
are you
again.
talking
Can you
about?
hear me?
Connected. It's making noise. But I'm not hearing their conversation.
Can you hear me right here? Can you hear me right here? Can we good?
Okay, now I can hear
I think
you
we're
guys.
good. I think we're Gucci. All right. Okay, so you can hear
Okay,
us.
awesome.
I can hear you. I can't hear myself either. I think we're ready to go.
Okay.
Welcome to Fox News. I'm Tucker Carlson tonight.
Fuck it, we'll do it live. All right, so now we're gonna actually like start the recording. Alex, do you want to do the intro?
Sure. I mean, I got what she sent me, and I just added a few things. So yeah, I could go for it.
All right, if everyone's ready.
I mean, isn't it so bizarre writing those bios
Yes.
about you?
It is. It's
Yes, it is.
About yourself?
Yeah, it's like you have to like dive into your own ego for like one paragraph.
I'm good at
Look
that.
how fabulous I am.
All right, we all ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready, yes.
All right, let's do a recording in 3, 2, 1.
Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Today I'm excited to announce that we are bringing back Nazla Donmez to the podcast. If you remember, she was on the abortion debate over a year ago now, I think. But if you don't remember, or if you didn't see that episode, she's a fellow graduate of Chapman down in Orange County. She got a BA in Strategic and Corporate Communications and minors in Italian Studies and Journalism. She comes from a very multicultural background and is driven by a passion for art, history, and the study of culture. She's currently working as a producer, project manager, and writer both independently and with multiple creative studios in LA. Specifically today, we're bringing her on because she is Turkish and from what I've gathered, spent a lot of her younger life inside of Turkey. And so obviously in the US right now, there's definitely some erosions of democracy and the rhetoric that Trump used didn't help. And so I'm just curious to hear what Nazla has to say about Recep Erdogan in Turkey and maybe the highlights or the parallels. So Nazla, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. The Packers lost. Haven't left the house in weeks, you know.
Just the usual. Let's say I'm doing as well as I can in the current climate.
Yeah, aren't we all?
I guess that's a good way to put it.
So obviously I gave a brief little intro of just kind of your background, but for our listeners, like, I don't know, kind of enlighten all of us of what your maybe like younger years were like, because you spent most of your time in Turkey, right, when you were younger?
Sure. So I was born there. I was born in Istanbul. I lived there for about 18 years. I went to a French high school there, and then I moved to Paris for a couple of years to pursue film school. And I got it wasn't like a full college degree because I kind of quit halfways and came here and studied something completely different. But I've spent most of my time in Turkey, and I got to witness basically the change in politics, overall mentality, and the shift from a more secular regime to a more authoritarian and oppressive discourse.
Yeah,
So I grew up through that.
That's what I was doing my research. I learned like how for decades the military, I guess, was like inherent on trying to protect the secularism. So when you were like, was that obvious when you're like in schools and stuff? Did they talk about the importance of secularism in your education?
I mean, before French school, I went to an American school, so I was always in private schools and never went to state school. But I know from friends and within my education too, secularism was definitely a theme that was taught at a very early age. On top of that, the importance and the respect towards like military and their contribution to it was definitely evident in the curriculum. But we also had to learn about religion, which in a secular country should not be a mandatory course, in my personal opinion, and I feel like on a rational level. But that, like, there was a contradiction there, definitely. But mostly it was a value. It was taught as a value. It was taught as a value. I would say that.
When you say you learned
something
about,
to protect.
When you say when you learned about or the curriculum included religion, was that like mainly
It was a
Islam?
mandatory course, but it wasn't like world religions per se. It was mostly focused on Islam.
Okay. Okay.
And I mean more like moral section of it all. Like instead of teaching like, prayers and or like the history of it, it was all about like how to be a better person, how to be kind, how to be, I don't know, generous, etc. That was the education I received during primary school. After that, I mean, I went to like French school, so we didn't really have much of that, but we still had it because the Turkish curriculum made it mandatory.
So was the military and kind of this whole idea of enforcing secularism, would you say it was successful?
I mean, when you look at the situation right now, I wouldn't say so. I think, I mean, similar to what's going on here, and I don't know if you guys read it, but Harari wrote about it in like 21 Lessons for 21st Century. This discourse of secularism and military control, etc., that definitely excluded a group of people who don't want to live like that. And what Erdogan was able to do was to give a voice to those people who deemed themselves irrelevant and who were often ridiculed or oppressed in social ways, I would say. He kind of gave them a voice. So during his, I mean, I guess you could say reign, you definitely saw that respect and admiration and trust towards the military crumble, especially with the coup or attempt at a coup or fake attempt at a coup. I don't know, whatever.
All right.
You wanna
So you think so?
We'll get into that later, but
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah.
that definitely changed the minds of people. But people who are like me and my family who believe in secular values are obviously not comfortable with what's going on. I mean, I moved to another country, so
Really quick, outside of like the major cities, say like outside of Istanbul, what's the climate like though amongst like say rural Turkey? Do you think there was a feeling like are they secular and do they support secularism?
I think the aspect of religion definitely has always got in the way of that. For instance, in the 40s, they had village institutions and they had adopted a more Western way of approaching education. But like even then, these institutes had to be closed down because people didn't want to send their daughters to school. So I think within Turkey, rural or the cities, the biggest problem is just ignorance, and sometimes religion really like fuels that ignorance. So even in like, I can't just say it's different in cities and it's different in rural areas because there's always that clash wherever you go. But definitely where people are less educated, there's a tendency to support more populist discourse or, like the similarity between Trump and Erdogan to me is really interesting because they speak with certainty and they have these aspirational messages that they have. Like with Trump, it was make America great again. And he kind of gave a voice to these low class people who were feeling like they were not included in the conversation, as well as rich people who didn't want to pay that much taxes, right? So what Erdogan did kind of was like make Turkey great again by turning his face towards the Ottoman Empire and like bringing back that world domination rather than, quote unquote, obeying Western countries by adopting their values. So I just can't like make a separation between rural and city because I think that just crosses those borders of, I don't know, like multicultural backgrounds or the cosmopolitan living, He was able to get into the minds of people who just didn't have a problem, living secular lifestyles earlier.
When I learned that like, there was that big shift after the Ottoman Empire fell. That a figure named like Ataturk, I believe.
Ataturk.
Right. Yeah. So he like aggressively went against that. So he like banned headscarves and stopped wearing the fez to try and really shift the culture of Turkey, more Western. But he almost did it in an authoritarian manner for a while.
Definitely.
And so I wonder like, because my question is like, how does someone like Erdogan so successfully change the constitution where he can appoint judges and where he can eradicate the parliament? Like how does that happen? And I wonder, is it because Turkey never quite got on its democratic roots? Like how do you feel about that?
Like I said, there was always a population that had the, what's the word for that in English?
I don't know.
This desire, I would say, this hunger to go back to that. Because I mean, like, telling people, "Oh, you're the best. We were this, we were that." Like, there's this discourse of it was like foreign forces. They don't want us to succeed. So he created this discourse of fear and like this, like pointing out an enemy, rather than this is what has been done wrong over the years internally, and we're going to fix this. So that's definitely something I think that fed into it. And he also definitely underlined the fact that this, like, there was an authoritarian undertone in what Atatürk did. But I mean, he had to. He could have just declared himself the new emperor and move on with his life, but he had a vision to build a new country. And that vision, I think, is lost to a lot of people who fell victim to this discourse. And it's also because Turkey never actually experienced being colonized, thanks to what Atatürk did. I don't think people actually have a sense of what could have happened. So it's very easy to glamorize Ottoman Empire when you didn't experience the repercussions of its fall in a way that other empires have experienced. So he definitely built on this lack of information, and there's also this huge nationalism in Turkey, especially with the military background. Like growing up at school, every Monday we would sing like İstiklal Marşı, and then you say salute to Atatürk, etc. You basically repeat this promise to be a great citizen every week, etc. Some people, I guess, don't really relate to that. They don't feel like they should be at the service of their country, and they expect it to be at service for them, but not in like the sense that it would be here. I don't know. So he definitely had the audience. He just picked them out, and he also comes from a very poor family, and people who are like him felt like more elitist leaders didn't relate to them. The one thing that's similar between, I feel like, Americans and Turkish people is that this love for the underdog, but like rather than in most Western countries, I mean, we see it in the UK too, but people want a qualified leader. I feel like some societies have more tendency towards voting for the charismatic guy, or voting for the guy who says what they want to hear, rather than looking at the facts. So there's a lot of factors within Turkish society, like the dynamic and the DNA of Turkish society, that played into that. I think that's why he was able to destroy something that took years to build within, 20 years. But I don't think it's the end. I don't think it's fully destroyed, because now with the economy in a horrible state, people are waking up to it.
Well, before we get
So
to
we'll
the
see what
future,
happens.
before we get to the future, because I do want to ask you more about like what could happen.
Sure.
Let's dig into the nitty gritty of that coup, because
Okay.
I saw you say attempted coup, and then I remember hearing that a lot. So look, I really don't know much. What I learned is very preliminary, that the military. My understanding is that the military viewed Erdogan, as many as others in the past, as a religious threat to the secularism of the state. Tried to overthrow him, but Erdogan had so much public support that it failed. What's your opinion on what happened?
I was there when it happened.
Okay.
And, Turkey has a history of coups. And certain parts of it don't make sense to most of people, because coups are supposed to happen through, like, higher up people who have the ability to seize control. But the soldiers that were involved in this, and that were there were also who refused to hurt citizens, and like citizens hurt them. There's a lot to unpack there, but there was no organization value to it. They weren't able to capture Erdogan, like compared to past examples. There's a lot there that's unanswered, and that's why people are a little. Did it really happen though? A lot of people think that it didn't really happen, but he used it as a way to discredit. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Discredit the military and kind of portray them as this enemy that wants to take the power away from the public and what the public wants. So that's speculation. You know what I mean? That's why I brought it up. Not that I necessarily believe that it happened one way or the other, but that is definitely a conversation a lot of people are having. And the other version is obviously what you said.
Just to be devil's advocate for a minute, I was reading out of the Cairo Review of Foreign Affairs, and they were talking about how there's nothing new with the military overthrowing governments to sustain this form of secularism over the years. Yeah. And so do you think that maybe Erdogan's somewhat popularity was, and this is kind of a two-parted thing here, so I apologize, but do you think that maybe this suppression of religious values over time was kind of this ticking time bomb that allowed him to use democratic norms to slowly transform the state? And then almost the coup was like the perfect just, icing on top of the cake, where, I mean, it's kind of right out of the authoritarian handbook, right? You blame the opposition. And since then, 50,000 people have been detained. So but
you point a finger.
Exactly.
I agree with you.
I'm just curious, was Erdogan wrong to kind of want to keep the military out of determining what is secular and what is not?
Staging, quote unquote, staging a coup to get there is obviously not the right way. Sure. But as an idea, yes, I do believe that what's secular or not should not be determined by the military. But in societies like Turkey, where you would say majority of people are not very educated, it's in the DNA of the country that higher up people deciding what happens to you. It's not an organic way of changing that comes from, what's the word for that? From bottom to top. It's dictated. You know what I mean? So obviously the nature of that is wrong. It should not be dictated, and certain things should be organically. But when you look at the history of the country, if Atatürk did not dictate a certain change, if he did not dictate this way of saying no and obviously fighting back, there would be no Turkey. So from an ideological or maybe like a philosophical perspective, opinions can vary, but I wouldn't say he's wrong to obviously say that it should not be dictated by the military, but it should not be dictated by him as well. He used democratic values as a mask almost to get to the point he wants, so he can then dictate his ideal of Turkey, like an Islamic world leader, which was honestly, I believe that was his intention. And obviously his relationship with Iraq, etc., that definitely showed him that's not gonna be happening in a while. But you cut one head off and replace it with the other, the end you'll get is obviously going to be of the same nature, if that makes sense. It's a Turkish saying, but I don't know if it translates.
It certainly seems interesting, though, because it seems like you have a nation that has a history of being aggressively secular, or at least post-Ottoman Empire. But then on top of that, a vast, at least from what I tell just based off of my limited knowledge of the statistics, is majority Islam or Muslim, and probably a good majority of fundamentalist Islam. Erdogan seems like even mentioned himself that he doesn't believe men and women are equal, right? That's a pretty bold statement for a world leader in today's age. And so it does seem like this. It does seem like I guess it's hard for me to understand like authoritarian protection of secularism because I'm an American, but it does seem like it's basically either that or authoritarian Islam.
Yeah, like he gave a voice to people who glamorize and romanticize, like what you said, this way of living based on Islam. And I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I obviously grew up learning about Islam. And at the essence of it, the way you practice it, the way it's practiced in Turkey is completely different from other countries.
Okay.
It's way more relaxed and respectful of other people's choices. We have huge Jewish and Christian populations in Turkey, and who coexisted before. I'm not saying they coexisted perfectly, because there are incidents in Turkish history that obviously there was Muslims being aggressive with Christian people, and there are really shameful incidents. Like, I feel like it has been something Turkey has been struggling with since day one, because you make a change that comes from top, and some people are not going to be okay with it, and it had to be suppressed in various ways. But what he did was not only give a voice to these people, and it didn't stop at the point of like, you're accepted, you're heard too. It has reached to the point that if you're not like me, you're a traitor. So he has given these people the incentive to what's the word for that? Ostracize, I believe.
Yeah, ostracize others.
Or like demonize others who are not like them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because my biggest takeaway is I kind of see Turkey like very similar to the U.S. when it comes to the rural-urban divide, and it's something that Drew and I talked about like a month ago or so. But I noticed like the BBC talks about how last year his group, the Justice and Development Party, they won local elections but lost in Ankara, Istanbul, and Izmir. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's funny because he gained popularity in Istanbul. Like that was like I think almost like a decade and a half or 2 decades ago. That was where he really gained stability
When
and
he
power.
was
And I see parallels to Trump. Because Trump's a New York billionaire who all of a sudden now probably doesn't even want to go back to New York because of how just unpopular he is. But he now appeals, like now his base is not in the city that gained him the popularity and the image. It's in these rural areas that I would almost have always wanted someone like that to fight for what they feel like is suppressed. And like I keep seeing time and again in my readings, like whenever I see Turkey, like I feel like a lot of more conservative people consider him to be a sultan, kind of in the same way Putin in Russia has been called the new czar. You know, and
he's like
I
a
just
rock
wonder.
star for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I almost feel like one revolution may change something temporarily, but you can't fight history and culture. And like the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, you know, got rid of the czar and brought about almost 100 years of oppression and chaos. But in the end of the day, Putin is as rich and entrenched as a czar 100 years earlier, and it seems like Erdogan is just part of that pendulum shift that goes back to, and so that's why I don't want to totally discredit some of the rural people in this situation or the less educated or the more religious, because I feel like maybe that's just how the pendulum goes.
I completely agree with that. Like, I mean, we see this rise of authoritarianism all over the world right now, because in times of uncertainty, and that's something that's increasingly something we experience, people look up to people, doesn't matter if they're saying the truth or not, who speak with certainty, who set the frame for them to think, so they don't have to think for themselves. And obviously, I mean, like you said, like history kind of repeats itself. And that's why I use the word irrelevance, because just like Trump gave relevance back to people who are kind of looked down upon, you know, like rural white populations or not, or like people who have been ridiculed or like, you know, what's the word for that? Marginalized in the past.
There you go. Yeah.
Ostracized and marginalized in the past. he has done the same thing for these people. And it is true that within Turkish history, a lot of attention hasn't been given to these rural communities. And what he also did for Istanbul first, and as prime minister in the beginning, he did a lot of good things for the economy. That cannot be denied.
Sure.
And that also kind of gave him, I think, his personal idea of himself as the savior, and the people too, because he fixed a lot of things that seemed to be not working, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I'm sure Putin did something good for Russia when, like, I'm not very familiar with this.
Absolutely.
Like background, but I'm sure he must have done something good, at least in the beginning, for him to rise to such popularity.
True,
or
that.
at least, I know.
Popular.
Yes. Yeah, so to reference what Nazli's talking about.
You know, someone must have felt represented by him for him to rise to such power.
Exactly. So yeah, there was a huge GDP bump in the mid 2000s when Erdogan was in power, and then you know, and so that's exactly what Nazli's talking about. And so yeah, I think we've covered, you know, how he got there. Let's talk about moving forward. Like, what does the opposition to Erdogan look like? Because you know, for me, an outsider, Erdogan is probably the only Turkish politician I can name. Is there anyone like on the opposition force that who's the new underdog that can maybe push the pendulum back? If there is one.
Well, historically, in Turkey, it's whoever is in charge of Istanbul kind of has their path open to presidency.
Okay.
I mean, they're always one of the top candidates with Erdogan. It has happened before as well. So there's a person named Ekrem İmamoğlu, and you know, like, he was elected as mayor, and then they said, "Oh, you stole the election," and they repeated the election, and he won again. He's that guy. So he's definitely a candidate that a lot of people are hopeful about.
Did Erdogan's Erdogan's party say he stole the election?
Erdogan's party,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
They said that he stole the election, and the election was repeated, and he was elected again with even more votes. So that kind of didn't work out for them. He's definitely a strong candidate in people's minds. Also, the mayor of Ankara is a very has a lot of support.
And these are more like
he has a lot of
parties?
support.
Are these like center left parties or left parties or center left parties?
These are not left parties. The idea of the left party in Turkey is almost, I would say, on a mainstream level, non-existent.
Wow. Okay.
They refer to themselves as social democrats, but I mean, social democracy in the U.S. and social democracy in Turkey are also completely different, because even the rightest of the right party will still support free education and healthcare. You know what I mean? Like,
wow, I can only imagine.
When the conservatism of these parties, or the spectrum, is more about
religion,
I don't know,
identity.
Yeah, I would say so. I guess, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So there's Ekrem İmamoğlu, Mansur Yavaş, the mayor of Ankara, and then Muharrem İnce, who ran against Erdogan for presidency, I believe is starting his own party right now. The problem with Turkish opposition over the years that I mean, this is my humble opinion, but I think a lot of people would agree with me, is the fact that they are fighting against each other a lot, rather than collectively working for better. And that is a major problem. And I think that is one of the reasons people are they're not hopeful when it comes to the promises they make. Because a lot of people who have been voting for the main opposition party for years, they're like, where's the change? What's going to happen?
Dang.
But with the numbers like shifting in the parliament and whatnot, I feel like they're going to have more room to implement certain changes. I mean, Erdogan might kind of, tone down his discourse because he's scared to lose his power, or he might up it even more. I mean, he basically said stuff like things that are on the spectrum of, or like kind of around saying, if you're not with me, you're a terrorist. So
just a quick question, like, because there's a term out of the Kremlin in Russia, managed democracy, and they use it time and time again for what's his name, Alexei Navalny, like, and it kind of triggered that
he's
memory in
jailed
my
at the moment, right?
No,
Yes.
he's back in Russia though, and the argument is though that he's actually closer in politics to Putin than the left, and so the Kremlin. There's an argument that the Kremlin just keeps him around because he gives people a sense of democracy, because he's quite nationalist, he's quite right wing in a lot of ways, where he'd probably agree with Putin on stuff, but he's anti the Kremlin and anti corruption. So people think there's the facade of democracy. Do you think that's kind of similar in Turkey to a certain extent?
100%, because I mean, people, I feel like, especially career politicians, I genuinely don't think it's within their agenda to implement change or make things better. It's all about status, etc. And so I think a lot of these people pursue these positions not because they disagree with Erdogan or like they have this desire to make things better for their country, but to just pursue the power and the privileges the position brings to them. And also, like you said, creating a fake opposition that makes you look democratic, that is definitely something that's existent. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that about Turkish politics necessarily, but within Russia, I feel like it's possible.
Well, anything else we wanted to just touch on before we get out of here? We are kind of close to our time threshold. Any like final thoughts, Nazli, you want to give us about Turkey's authoritarian slip?
I mean, I think I got myself into enough trouble by speaking about it right now, but
well, I certainly.
I just want to say something about your previous podcast when you guys were talking about the attack on the Capitol. That kind of like reminded me of how like these people are so disinformed. That reminded me of like the social DNA of Turkey, because like I feel like this, what the French called bataillesisation. It's like everybody's speaking about everything without having any expertise or information on it. And the sphere of irrelevance and obviously the disinformation fueled by the leaders. I think that's what led to those people to the Capitol. And I think that's also the driving force behind a lot of people in Turkey. So my final note would be just to like promote education and common sense.
Hell yeah, well you heard it there,
and
folks.
Thinking for yourself.
That's right, that's right. And doing your research beyond the first Google click you see.
Exactly.
Or your Facebook timeline. Well, that should wrap us up for this episode, guys. Thank you again, Nazla, as always. And for everyone else listening and watching, thanks
a great time.
For tuning in. Yeah. Let us know your thoughts. Do you see Turkey further slipping into authoritarian regime? Do you agree with Nazla's thoughts or not, or ours? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to check out the recorded version on YouTube, and for audio, Podbean, Apple Podcast, and a plethora of other sites. Thanks again for listening.
Auf Wiedersehen.
All right, so then I will, for those watching live, if you just came in, sorry, we're just wrapping up. For those that followed, thanks again, and we're going to wrap the stream up. We're going to be live next week.